Ask Reddit on Reddit Rundown. Serious, hospital workers, what regrets do you hear from dying patients? In the ER, it's not something most people see coming when they arrive, but it's usually the same regret when they are coherent. They all wish their family was there, which sucks even more lately with COVID since family can't come in initially. Or they cry out for their SO in a panic. It's gotten to the point recently where we tell them SO is right here with you. The look of relief on people's faces just hearing that gets me every time. People just want to not be alone at the end. He wished he had been a better father to his daughter. He wished they had reconnected. His dementia prevented him from remembering they had reconnected years before and that she visited often. I wish I could have made him aware that he had accomplished his last wish. But he died not really understanding that. I was a hospice nurse. One of my elderly patients had skin cancer, a huge malignant melanoma on the side of his neck that was growing rapidly. He had been a farmer all his life and never married. One night we were talking and I asked him if there was anything he wished he had done differently in his life, and he thought about it a minute and said he wished he had worn a hat when he was farming. I wish he did too. AEMT here. Most patients that I see in my ambulance are too sick to talk in these cases, but one sticks with me. Mid-40s male called us for chest pain, put a 12 lead on, and he was in the middle of a massive heart attack. For those that know the term, he was throwing tombstones. Sad part was he had medical training, so he knew that it wasn't good. We were screaming to the hospital. He looked me dead in the eye and goes, "I should have ate that fucking cake." When I asked what he meant, he told me, "Fuck what others think. If it makes you happy, do it. Eat the cake, pet a squirrel, take a nap. Fuck anyone else, it doesn't matter." He crashed shortly after we got to ER, didn't come back. Now at least if I want to do something purely for the fun of it and my wife asks why I want to, all I have to say is I want to pet the squirrel. I worked as an oncology nurse right out of nursing school. I was barely 21 years old. Had a patient about my age who was dying of lung cancer. A few hours before he died, I sat with him and he was telling me how much he wished that he would have had more time to maybe fall in love, marry, have kids. He was so young. He asked me to call his parents and he died shortly after they arrived. It was awful. His regrets were more about the life not lived. Many older patients had some interesting life stories and most wanted to tell them before they died. Most were at peace with the life they lived. Many regretted working so much and not spending enough time with family. I work in a hospital. Whenever someone is at the end of their life, they always just want to be with their loved ones. Any regrets I've heard is always family related. They wanted more time with the people they love. Most people are at peace with things though. People also tend to wish they took their health seriously. Paramedic but close enough. Made a run on a woman in her 30s for shortness of breath. Her and her boyfriend had just moved into an apartment together. They were fighting over something trivial, which room to unpack first or something. He thought she was just being dramatic. We transported, she never made it. Went from awake and talking to unresponsive and systolic, no cardiac activity, in a matter of seconds. They were so caught up in a little argument that they never said goodbye. They never told each other they loved them. She didn't have any last words. And honestly, that's even worse. My grandpa passed away when I was around 12 from a brain tumor. My mom and her brother were outside the hospital room talking to the doctors, and I was alone with him, and we were just chatting. All of a sudden, he got really quiet, and looked at me and said, "Sub-Lieutenant, never let a vice be an escape from reality." The look in his eyes, I will never forget the pain I saw in them. My mom had been drilling it into my head from a young age that I should never gamble, because my grandpa had an addiction, would lose entire paychecks playing cards. She grew up in small towns, and my grandma only worked part-time as a nurse. Seeing the look my grandpa had, I could tell how much pain he still lived with, knowing that his addiction caused his kids to go to bed hungry some nights all those years ago. My mother-in-law. Her husband, stepdad to my husband, would not leave her alone in the hospital for 1 minute. He is a controlling, crazy man. My husband was visiting and somehow, she convinced his stepdad to go take a break. She pulled my husband, her son, close and said, "I don't want to be kept alive on machines." Her husband was her power of attorney, so my husband had no power. She was kept alive way longer than needed. I think, in the end, she regretted trusting him. I remember this 40-year-old patient that I had who was dying from breast cancer that spread throughout her body. She was diagnosed with breast cancer 10 years earlier and had a mastectomy. The doctor recommended for her to have a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction due to high risk of recurrence of cancer. She said that she wanted to keep her breast, a real breast rather than an implant, in case she remarries and will be somewhat whole. She regretted not getting the bilateral mastectomy. If she did, she would not gotten cancer in her remaining breast and dying at such a young age. The patient never ended up marrying after all. A week later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I instantly told the doctor that I want a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction. I also had an aggressive form of cancer. My doctor kept pushing a lumpectomy, which I probably would have gotten before I have heard how much she regretted her decision. I feel that she actually saved my life sharing and opening up with her regret of all time. Edit, thank you all so much. I thought this would just get buried. I pray that the ones facing breast cancer will recover, and my prayers are with you. You are not alone in this. I was 48 years old at the time of my diagnosis and have been cancer-free for the 10 years now. I think of that lady often. She was a mother of 5. She was a true blessing to me. She was my last patient on my last shift prior to getting my results and starting chemo. If it wasn't for her, I know I would not be here. Edit 2, I had grade 3 HER2 breast cancer. I did training to be a CNA and we had to work in a nursing home as part of our training. I didn't really get into any deep conversations with the patients there, but I can say this. If you have family in a nursing home, please visit with them. It's a sad and lonely place to be. My mom did home health and hospice. My stepdad was very abusive and my mom would take me to work with her to try and protect me. She didn't want to leave him due to religious beliefs. That's a different story. There was an old man. I'd play cards with him. We'd talk about working on the farm we had. He was a nice guy. He figured out I was being physically abused. His health started declining and he couldn't play cards or get out of bed. The last time I saw him, he said he was sorry he wasn't younger and that he couldn't help me. Almost 25 years ago, and I still remember him. End of life physician here. CPR. No, seriously, hear me out. Imagine using your hands to crush the sternum down 2 inches repeatedly of your 90-year-old grandmother who weighs 90 pounds so that maybe you can then put her on a ventilator from which she might never get off alive. We ask this of everyone who comes into the hospital, but too often it's asked more like, hey, if you're drowning, do you want us to save you? Rather than what it truly is, especially for those who most likely won't survive it in the first place, and if they do will be significantly worse off than they were before they died. The survival statistics for patients with 1 to 2 significant comorbidities with an in-hospital cardiac arrest is like less than 5% to leave alive, and then 30-day survival is 5% of that original 5%, if I remember correctly. I cannot count the number of times families were adamant on having it done to their loved one only to then see what it entails firsthand and beg us not to do it again. A little different, but I worked in a GI lab and we had a much older man, late 70s, probably maybe late 80s, it's been a while, come in for GI issues. While doing the procedure we found cancer and it was a death sentence. Super bad, and I think he had refused to have a colonoscopy up until this point. The doc said it was horrific, we couldn't get past the cancer, it was so bad. He said maybe a few months. We finish up and I am at bedside with the patient and doc comes in to talk and family wouldn't believe it. The guy wouldn't believe it. The doc backed down and not once told him how bad it actually was. I was pretty upset because doc basically lied to the family and gave them false hope because they wouldn't stop arguing and he just didn't care to tell them the truth. I still wonder often about what happened to him. If he spent his last days fighting it and wearing himself out, or if let himself enjoy his last few months. Colon cancer is horrific. It looks exactly like the word cancer. It's disgusting. It looks alien. Please, please, please people, get your colonoscopy when you are told. It's not just you you're saving, it's your kids who will get screening earlier if they find something in you. But if you don't, they'll never know they are at risk. I was a new nurse, flying solo. We got a call for an incoming trauma, woman in her 50s involved in a multi-car accident. We were already at the ambulance bay, unsure of the woman's complete condition. She rolled in breathing on her own, but very labored with asymmetrical chest expansion. She was profusely bleeding, had multiple deep lacerations, pupils blown, debris covering most of her, etc. Her vitals were unstable, she was circling the drain, we knew she was on the verge of coding. I was standing near her head, ready to assist in supporting her airway but also providing comfort and doing my best to calm her. The woman looked me directly in the eyes and in a hoarse, labored voice stated, "I was angry, I told her I was disappointed in her." She began to cry, her vitals plummeted. "I'm sorry," was the last thing she said before her heart stopped. We coded her, intubated her, performed round after round of ACLS, only to eventually have to call time of death. I still see her face at times, her eyes filled with more emotional pain than physical. It took much longer and was so much harder to write this than I thought it would be. I used to be a nursing student. I decided to drop out in my second year because it wasn't where my heart was. During my placement at the city hospital I got to talking to an older man, he must have been like 88 then. 2010. He was talking about how I look exotic and always complimented my long hair etc. etc. I was never threatened or put off by it. One day he told me I looked like the woman he wished he never let go. That he was completely happy about how his life turned out, loved his family and late wife, but he always thinks about the woman he shouldn't have let go by. Years later, I met a guy at work who ended up moving across the country for work. I remembered this old man and followed my heart. I never let my love get away. I married him this summer. You should always at least try, even if it doesn't work out, go for it and find out so you never wonder. Edit. Wow, thanks for all the responses and the cute award. I wasn't expecting people to react to a cheesy experience like mine. 3 people DM'd me to elaborate on my story with the old man, John David or JD as I'd called him. Here it goes. JD described this woman and his relationship with her as the perfect little blip in his life. She was a petite Indian woman, I am a petite Pakistani woman, with long black hair and the most amazing smile. They met when he was 18 and she was 16. He was a jock at college and realized that her brother was taking the same classes as him. So he befriended the dorky Indian guy to get to his sister, who worked at the grocery store in town. That's how they met, and it worked. They dated for 6 months before she randomly broke it off. Turned out she was just uncertain about where their relationship would go and could go as an interfaith and racial couple. JD wished he fought harder, because her brother married a Chinese woman and if it weren't for his jockey dumb attitude he would gotten over her decision to end things and fought harder for her to understand it would be alright. Decades later, this petite, long-haired girl with an amazing smile, me, comes back into his life and he was flooded with the memories of the love of his life. He said the 6 months they were together were just the most deep and loving and peaceful months of his life. He should have been with her and she was the one who got away. He said back then, you would fall in love in weeks and you loved hard and that was the love of his life. To the people in this thread contemplating asking out their crush, do it. To the girls out there waiting on the guy to make a move, do something about it. To the person unhappy with their career choice, dude, I changed my mind twice. If you put your head down and try, you will always find some solace in that. I had a patient with who I was in the room with when her doctor explained she only had a few weeks to live. I knew her well, spent quite a bit of time talking to her up to the news. The days that followed, she seemed to have accepted she was dying. She lived this beautiful, independent, and successful life, maybe not money successful, but just plain happy. Anyways, when I was helping her to the tub on day 10 since receiving the news, she just broke down crying and couldn't stop crying about how much she wished she didn't put her dog down because they could have died together. Come to find out her dog was on his deathbed too. I guess she put her dog down a few days before going into the hospital. She knew her life was over so she put him down first. She hated herself for it and for the fact she blew the opportunity for them to spend their last moments together. Really heartbreaking to watch, to hear that unfold. She passed early in the morning 2 days later. I took a couple of mental health days off after she passed and spent some time looking up dogs to adopt and new jobs to apply for. I worked with a man in his late 30s with pancreatic cancer. He had worked long hours so he could retire early. He had a young family and never got to see his kids grow up. I've also lost my birth dad and stepdad to cancer. Both worked their asses off, saving their travel plans for retirement. Neither of them lived to see those dreams realized. When I got engaged, my stepdad was thrilled to become a grandpa. He wasn't alive by the time my son was born. I worked in hospice. Top regret was not spending time with family and or lost time due to a family feud. Probably number 2 was wasting their life with their spouse, for various reasons, when they could have possibly been with someone they love / met a soulmate. Number 3 was usually not accomplishing a bucket list item such as living in a foreign country. We were not supposed to let people bring their pets in to say goodbye. Other people could have allergies or an untrained pet could poop somewhere, but I always told family members to smuggle in Fluffy in an oversized purse Paris Hilton style. Large dogs were harder, but since they were literally emotional support animals at the time, I never told them to leave. Not sure it belongs here, but I'll vent anyway. Both grandparents passed within a month and a half of each other earlier this year, likely due to COVID-related issues. It was pretty difficult. My mom FaceTimed me crying in my Nana's final days because my Nana was asking her to get me on the phone. Nana was thinking she was drowning and no one would get her out of there, that mom wouldn't listen to her. There was obviously no water in the hospital. And she was on like the 6th floor. But she kept pleading for me to get her out. Mom crying hysterically. I had to tell Nana I took care of it and the water is no longer in there. She took a big sigh of relief, thanked me for doing it. She said her arms felt like they were about to rip off because she was holding on so tight to stay afloat. I told her she can rest now. That it's all been taken care of. Told her how much I love her, how much we all love her. But encouraged her to rest up. Apparently, she'd been hysterical for some hours, which is exhausting. She started resting. Fucking sucks. Tearing up as I write this. The fucking circle of life, man. It can be wretched and wrought with pain. Just sucks. And it really, really sucks that, living in a different city, 4 hours driving distance, that I would have but couldn't be there due to COVID, for either one of them in their last days, especially knowing that we, their grandkids, were their whole light of life. R.I.P. Nana and Granddad. He was one of my first patients as a nursing student, named Frank. He was 92. After knowing him a few days, he disclosed to me his regret was outliving everyone he loved. That he and his wife hadn't had kids, and he was all that was left, and that he wanted to see his wife again. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just listened. And it made me realize how living so long isn't great if everyone you love is gone. He passed away later that week, and while I distinctly recall some of my classmates being upset, I felt relief for him. I knew he was where he wanted to be. I've had many patients since, but you tend to remember your first ones. Other than that, ditto what everyone's saying. More time with family / loved ones, wish they wasted less time with work or other bullshit, etc. Thanks for listening to Reddit Rundown. Give a thumbs up and subscribe, and help me get to 1,000 subs. Leave a comment below on what kind of topics or stories you would like to hear. You can also check out other videos on my channel. Thanks and have an awesome day.